Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our evening program on Missouri's Census Records and Tax Lists. This is a project that we have been working on for almost 8 years, and so we are very excited to provide you guys with a bit more information on the census records available in Missouri. We've shared a number of different aspects of this over the years on our Facebook page as we've gotten things online and when we launched our database. But this should hopefully give you a broader overview and delve into how to use our database a little bit more. So our census project began as a very small effort to create a list of all extant censuses for Missouri just for our own edification. We had enough information gathered that we decided to create a website with more details so that everyone would know what types of censuses existed for Missouri. And then we began an effort to index and digitize censuses because they are such a wealth of information and are so useful for genealogists, and so many of the non-federal population schedules weren't online anywhere. To do this, we partnered very early on with the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis. They hold a number of territorial censuses, early statehood tax lists, and for the largest set that we're interested in, the 1850 to 1880 mortality, agricultural, and industrial schedules. We were able to partner with them to borrow the censuses, digitize them, and then work to index them and place them online. We began this digitization in 2014, and we finished the censuses in 2018. We have not yet digitized the early tax lists, but we'll be starting that in the new year. The agricultural and industrial schedules were placed online in a browsable format in 2019, and then the mortality schedules were indexed and are now online in our census database. So the types of census records available for Missouri and that we're going to talk about tonight are territorial censuses, state censuses, federal censuses, and special censuses. We include tax lists when talking about territorial and state censuses because they are an amazing census substitute, and primarily for the period before Missouri's first federal census in 1830, they are very important because there's lots of areas that don't have any censuses taken of them until 1830. So the tax list is a really good way to place someone in a location at a time period. So starting off with territorial censuses and tax lists, when we say territorial censuses, we could be referring to French territorial censuses, Spanish territorial censuses, or U.S. territorial censuses, although there are not any known U.S. territorial censuses. 1752 is the first territorial census for Missouri that we are aware of. It's the 1752 census of St. Genevieve. And then we have U.S. territorial tax lists up through 1820. So the territorial time period covers 1752 to 1820. Censuses for this time period are located at county courthouses, at the Missouri Historical Society, as well as at the National Archives of Spain. We have a number of censuses located there that we were able to get copies of so we can index them and place them in our database. Again, tax lists are the best substitute you're going to find for census records, and they exist for various counties in the U.S. territorial period. We do not have any known tax lists for the French or Spanish territorial time period. But so those are going to cover 1804 through 1820. There is a list of all known censuses and all the tax lists physically held by the state archives on our webpage at this link. If you browse to the Missouri State Archives webpage and then the research page, you can click on censuses and view it. We'll go over that page a little bit more later on. Additional tax lists held by county offices might also be available, and those are going to be listed on our county microfilm finding aids at this link. On our territorial censuses webpage, you will see a list of all the extant territorial censuses that we have. This will give you the year, the district or area. There were not counties in Missouri as a territory until 1813. So generally these are going to be listed as districts. It's going to tell you if there's a real number, that means if it's on microfilm, or since most of these were digitized fairly recently, if we just have them on DVD in the reference room for people to use. And then one of the most important bits of information on this page is the column that says, is it transcribed? If it says yes, it should be in our census database. And if it says no, it's not yet in our census database, so you would need to contact us directly for a search or for copies. So you want to pay attention to that page. Additionally, I do want to point out that the 1766 Spanish Louisiana Territory Census is hyperlinked. That census includes all of Spanish Louisiana, so it includes New Orleans and other areas in Alabama and Mississippi, as well as Missouri and Arkansas. And we have indexed portions of it and have them in our database, but all of it is available, browsable as PDFs if you click that link. So this is an example of the 1791 Census of St. Louis. When we're talking French and Spanish territorial censuses, the records will be in French or Spanish. So that is something to keep in mind. And when you're doing searches for names, keeping in mind that the names will often be put in the French or Spanish version of the name and not the English version of the name. So that's definitely something you want to pay attention to when you are searching the censuses. Luckily, most of them are very, very, very neatly written and easy to read, which isn't always the case as we get later in time. They made a pretty good effort to have easy to read text. Moving on to state censuses and tax lists. State censuses are going to be anything after statehood, which is 1821. The first state census was taken in 1824, but does not survive. The first surviving state census is 1840. Only 24 counties have survived, but only 10 include names. The rest are abstracts and provide the basic information about the count and the number of people specifically. We do, in general, like most things that don't exist prior to 1837, blame the 1837 Capitol Fire on the fact that the 1840 is the first surviving state census. We hope that every once in a while we might find a few more out there. State censuses were taken every 4 years after 1840 until 1876. At that point, the General Assembly made the decision that they would accept the information from the federal census taken every 10 years and not spend time or money on a state census. There's, again, a list of known surviving state censuses available on our state censuses webpage. It looks just like the territorial censuses table. And again, tax lists are a great census substitute. There are no state tax lists maintained by the Missouri State Archives, so in this case, they are all maintained by the county and are available on our county microfilm finding aids, and so you can view them on our website there. Tax lists are something that we are actively working on imaging, and so we are updating our finding aids multiple times every year, and more tax lists will be available every time we update those lists. So federal census schedules are taken every 10 years. Missouri first shows up on the federal census in 1830. The population schedule is widely used, and it is widely available on various websites. So we do not plan to put the federal population schedule in our online database because it is so readily available. The federal non-population schedules, however, are not as widely available. They begin in 1850, and different schedules are taken at different time periods. The list to the right shows the variety of schedules that were taken at different times. Unfortunately, not all of these still exist, which makes me sad when I think about it. The unemployment schedule from 1930 in particular, I think, would be of great interest to people whose ancestors lived through the Great Depression, but unfortunately it no longer exists. Information about all the supplemental schedules is available on that federal census portion of our website. But we are going to talk a little bit more about the non-population schedules that do still exist and actually include names. So the agricultural schedule exists from 1850 to 1880. The manufacturer's schedule and the products of industry schedule, they renamed them at various times, exists for 1850 to 1880 as well. The military veteran schedule, which most people are fairly familiar with, and is online in all the same places as the federal population schedule, exists for 1890. The mortality schedules exist for 1850 to 1880, and the slave schedules for 1850 to 1860. So the agricultural schedules are browsable on our website by county. On our webpage, they are organized by county and within the county by civil township. So there's one PDF per county. 1850, 1860, and 1870 all look very similar and only have minor changes from census to census. And 1880 looks drastically different, but gives the same type of information. One thing to keep in mind with these schedules is they include non-residents. So if someone lived and worked in, say, St. Louis, but owned a farm in Franklin County, they might show up on the agricultural schedule in Franklin County, even though they show up on the population schedule in St. Louis. So those are things to keep in mind. Also across state lines. In 1850 and 1860, only farms with product worth more than $100 were included on the census. And in 1870 and 1880, it was farms with product worth more than $500. So if the farm was only making enough product to sustain the family, they might not actually be listed on this census. But if they made enough to meet the criteria, you'll get a bunch more information about how your ancestors lived and worked. So this is an example of what an agricultural census looks like. This is the 1850 census for Cole County. There's 46 fields across 2 pages. And 1860 and 1870 use the same style. It's slightly more fields across 2 pages, but 1 line per person. The ag schedules includes acres, the number of different types of livestock, the number of bushel or pounds of different types of produce, the value of the farm, information like that. When you get to 1880, it looks drastically different. So this is the 1880 Clay County. So there's 100 fields across 1 page instead of 2. The fields get more detailed. It's still the number of acres, but it asks you the number of acres improved versus unimproved, the values of the farm, the amount of fencing on the farm, the amount of labor paid, plus the amounts of various types of livestock or produce similar to what's on the previous schedules. So it's much more detailed. When you look at the page, there's only 10 people per page. And so if you're line 2 at the top where the name is, you're also going to be line 2 in the 2nd row and line 2 in the 3rd and in the 4th. So it just goes across slightly differently, but it allowed the record to stay on 1 page, which is easier for the enumerator to carry around with them. The next non-population schedule is the manufacturers or products of industry schedules. These again date from 1850 to 1860 and are browsable by county on our website. These are organized by county and again within the county by civil township. The manufacturer's schedule also includes non-residents, similar to the industrial schedule. So depending on where your ancestors owned businesses versus where they actually lived, they might show up in multiple locations. The manufacturer's schedule is only for operations making more than $500 per year. From 1850 to 1870, all the industries are on the same schedule. And again, 1880 looks very different. Another thing to keep in mind here is if your ancestors' main occupation was farming and they owned a farm and they're on the ag schedule, if they had any sort of side job, like being a blacksmith or operating some sort of mill on their farm to help supplement the income and made more than $500 per year at that, they might also show up on the industrial schedule. So don't assume that your ancestor's not on the industrial schedule just because they're on the ag schedule. So these are what the 1850 and 60 and then the 1870 industrial schedules look like. They are pretty similar, although 1870 has a little bit more information, but it's across 1 page and they cover a couple lines each. So the fields include the name of the corporation, the company or the individual, the type of product, the raw materials used, information about the type and amount of labor, and the total annual product and value. Again, you hit 1880, and they just decide to make things look interesting. So in 1880, they divided this manufacturer schedule into a general schedule plus 10 special schedules. For this, special schedule number 2, cheese and butter factories, either wasn't taken from Missouri, none existed in Missouri, it no longer exists, or it just isn't held by the Missouri Historical Society and we don't know where it is because we don't have any record for any Schedule 2 for any county. But the other schedules are like boot and shoe factories, flour and grist mills, salt works, lumber mills, sawmills, brickyards, paper mills, coal mines, quarries, agricultural implements. All of those are on separate sheets of paper. And then anything that doesn't fit into those goes onto the general schedule. So the format looks fairly similar to the ag schedule for 1880 in that there's kind of multiple rows across. And the same individuals can be on one line, the same numbered line across. So this is an example of the 1880 manufacturing schedule for Cole County for schedules number 5 and 6, which is lumber mills and sawmills, which is the top half of the schedule, and brickyards and tile works. So Osage Township in 1880 had 2 lumber mills or sawmills and no brickyards or tile works based on this schedule. The mortality schedule is the federal non-population schedule that most people are familiar with, although Missouri's hasn't been easy to use over the years. So again, these exist from 1850 to 1880. They're organized by county and within the county by civil township. The mortality schedules recorded deaths in the household the year before the census was taken. So for example, the 1850 mortality schedule contains deaths from June 1st, 1849 to May 31st, 1850. Unlike the ag and industrial schedules, these are indexed, so they're fairly easy to search. One thing you do want to keep in mind, infants are often listed just as infant or baby or blank, last name, child of parent's name. So often infants who died early on are not on this census with a name. The other kind of really cool thing is the mortality schedule is the one main place where the actual names of enslaved persons are often listed, although not always. So enslaved persons are often listed as name, slave of, owner's name, but sometimes they are just listed as slave of, owner's name. The 1850 and 1860 mortality schedules have the exact same fields in the same order. 1870 and 80 add information about the physicians primarily, but pretty much look the same. So the main fields you're going to have are age, sex, race, whether the person is free or slave, married, place of birth, the month they died, not the day specifically, but the month, their occupation, their cause of death, and their number of days ill. One of the really cool notes on these is you want to pay attention to the notes at the bottom of the page. The census enumerators would provide information about epidemics in the area, weird causes of death, and notes about how drunk the local doctors were, which might mean you need to take the cause of death in particular with a grain of salt. So some examples of notes we've found are from Clay County in 1850. Cholera has prevailed in this district in the last year, but not with half the fatality as in adjoining districts. Cass County, 1850, the latter half of spring, the first 2 months of summer, is a season of uninterrupted health. So that's exciting news for Cass County. This is a fun note about a gentleman who was murdered. Jesse Offield was poisoned by a woman with whom he was wanting to be more than properly intimate. I would suggest that that might be worth checking out a circuit court case for to see if anything pops up there. And then this note at the bottom from Lewis County, 1880. I've taken special pains to visit and explain this schedule to the within named physicians. Some of them I found, as you will see from their explanation, rather mentally unfitted from inebriation to make the cases very plain. Another fun morsel from the 1880 schedule specifically is there's a section at the bottom that indicates if any of the deaths from the previous year occurred when the family lived in a different enumeration district during the previous year. So if they moved in that 12-month period and someone died when they were living at the previous location, it will note it. So this is an example of someone who is in the Missouri mortality schedule, but according to this page, actually died in Cherryvale, Kansas. And so you might get some interesting information there about the movement of your ancestors if they just happened to die in that year before the census. So the slave schedule is the last set of these federal schedules we're going to talk about today. The slave schedules occur for 1850 and 1860. They list the names of owners, the numbers of enslaved people, and the age, color, and sex of the enslaved person. They do not include the names of the enslaved people. 1860 was supposed to include the names of all of those over 100 years old, but this is only done about 50% of the time. On our website, we do actually have a list for all the named slaves from Missouri who are over 100 years old. We took the list from RootsWeb and typed it up. It is available on our website. The slave schedules are indexed on both Ancestry and Family Search, and they are already browsable on Internet Archive. We have links to the Internet Archive browsable pages on our website since they're not behind any login or paywall. We do plan to digitize the slave schedules and index them ourselves as well to add them to the database in the future. Special censuses are definitely the least used of all the censuses, mostly because people just don't realize they exist. So special censuses are taken upon request for the population of a specific city or town in Missouri. They're generally requested when there's been a substantial increase or decrease in the population since the last census, and the city or town wants to change their categorization according to Missouri state law, which depends on their population size. These have to be filed with the Secretary of State, which is why we have copies of them. Unfortunately, many are just abstracts and don't include names, but those that do include names have been indexed and are in our database. A list of all available special censuses, whether they have names or not, are available on our special censuses page. So now we're getting to the really fun part. Our new database, which went online in June of 2020, that we've been working on for so long. This is what our census page looks like. So if you navigate to our census page from our Missouri State Archives webpage, at the top shows the 4 links about territorial censuses, state censuses, federal censuses, or special censuses. Clicking on those will provide all the information about those censuses, types of information they had, which ones survived, and whether or not they're indexed in the database. And then below that is the database itself. Now, if you are familiar with our databases, it looks really similar to all of our newer databases. Again, this does not include federal population schedules. We don't plan for it to include federal population schedules. The records that are included are some of the state and territorial censuses and tax lists, federal non-population schedules. Currently, the mortality schedule has been indexed, and the ag and industrial are browsable through the database, and it includes special censuses. If you look at the database, you can search last name, first name, or middle name, and you can play around with starts with and with contains. We do strongly suggest that if you're having trouble finding someone, and they should be in an area for a census that has been indexed and is in here, that you might want to play around with spelling. One of the best examples of ways things can just be really spelled wrong is we were indexing 1880 Perry County census, and one enumerator for this German area, which had lots of Wilhelminas, spelled Wilhelmina William-mina. Every single time there was someone named Wilhelmina. So sometimes the enumerator can't spell, sometimes the person can't spell, and sometimes there just wasn't general consensus on how a name was spelled. So you want to play around with that. Plus, sometimes there could be an error on our indexing side. It's not an issue we have often. I say that facetiously, but just play around with that. You can also search by county. Series is going to be state census, territorial census, federal census, special census, but you can narrow it down depending on what you're looking for. Notes, a census year range, gender, race, or age. For best results, you do want to search by name only, at least to begin with, as not all records include gender, race, or age. Tax lists, in particular, will never include that information, as their goal is to collect money, and so are really just recording the name. But depending on the time period, it may or may not have any of that other information. The notes field can be handy because it may include details like slave or asylum. So if you're indexing or looking at Callaway County, census, you'll come across all the people who are residents of the asylum in Fulton. And that might exist in other counties as well, depending on the year of the census. But the notes field will also search the manufacturing and industry subcategories. So if you just want to browse all the manufacturer schedules for 1880 related to flour mills, you could type in flour mill and view all the counties that have a flour mill schedule. The other thing is the counties will be listed as the county name at the time of the census, not the current counties and boundaries. Because of this, the county drop down includes Arkansas County, Dodge County, and Reeves County, none of which still exist in Missouri. Depending on the time period, Lawrence County in this drop down, if it's early territorial census, will actually consist of most of northern Arkansas as opposed to modern Lawrence County. So those are things that you want to be aware of. Be aware of when your county was created. Additionally, if you select agricultural schedules or manufacturer schedules, you will not actually be able to search by name anymore because they're not indexed yet. And if you select mortality schedules, you will get the added option to search cause of death. That looks a little bit like this. So on the left, you have the series selected as agricultural schedules. So the name fields are all grayed out. It has also popped up a business name at the bottom, but if you read the business name will not return any results because it's not yet indexed. But we do plan to index the industrial schedules and the ag schedules, so we built the database to be prepared for them. And on the right, the series selected is the mortality schedules. Because these have been indexed, you can search by name while the mortality schedules is selected, and you have the added benefit of searching cause of death at the bottom. You want to pay attention to that cause of death and spelling is not standardized. We put what is on the record. So you may need to search multiple ways to return results. So for example, heart might be listed in one and cardiac in another. Cholera is called different things at different times. Different fevers are called different things. So you just kind of want to be aware of what things are being called in particular time periods. And you may need to search multiple times if you're interested in that. Once you have done a search, you get your search results page. It looks very similar to all of our other search results page. We have one really cool new feature that we're very excited about. It's going to default to sorting by record series and then by name. But if you select the arrows across the top, kind of circled there at the top, you can choose which field you want it to search by. So if you want it to search by county first or name first or year first, you can do that. It will list the series title so you know what type of census we're looking at. And then the notes field will display any specific notes like slave or asylum notes, along with cause of death if we're looking at a mortality schedule, or the type of manufacturing schedule if you're looking at an 1880 manufacturing schedule. Once you have the individual census that you want to look at, you select View Details for more information. And then the View Detail page provides all the information indexed about each census record. And then at the bottom, the View Images button will appear if an image is available. So in this case, this is a mortality schedule. So it actually provides the name, the place of birth, the age, the gender, the race. This individual is a slave, so it tells you in the notes that Amanda Adams is a 16-year-old female slave of George Adams. She died of smallpox in May of 1850. And then you can select View Images to see a PDF of the actual census record. If you have browsed to the agro-industrial schedules within the database, this is what the results will look like. So in this case, I searched for more manufacturing and industrial schedules for St. Louis County. And so it gives me 1850 to 1880, all the manufacturing schedules for St. Louis County. And you could do this for the ag schedules as well. So these are browsable through the database as well as browsable through their specific census pages. If you prefer to browse them not through the database and you go to their census pages, this is the ag census page. So in this case, there's a column for the county, and then there'll be a PDF link for each census next to the county name. Again, you want to pay attention to the fact that not all counties are going to have a record for every year, focusing primarily on counties that didn't exist in 1850 or 1860. they're not going to have a census. So you would want to figure out what county they were a part of and view that county census. This is an ongoing project. We are going to continue to index the images. We have to add them to the database. We have active plans in place to index the slave schedules, so we will hopefully be adding them next. And as our e-volunteers are finishing up the World War I bonus claim project, as that finishes up, we plan to have those volunteers focus on various census projects, looking at a number of the state censuses that are not yet in the database, starting next spring after the new year of death certificates are indexed in January. So we plan to be adding more censuses on a very regular basis. And again, we're always keeping an eye out for other censuses that we do not know about. Things have shown up in weird places. We have a small portion of an 1876 Macon County census that showed up in the rafters of the Macon County Courthouse when they were doing renovations. So anything is possible. And there could be things in historical societies that we haven't found yet. And again, we're also going to be working with Missouri Historical Society to index those early tax lists for some of the counties in their collection. You guys feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call if you have any questions about the database. Spend some time playing around with it. There's so much really cool information in there, and non-federal population schedules really just don't get used enough, and they really do provide a lot of information and context for your ancestors and how they lived their lives.